They didn't just remove my name from the company website. They replaced it with his, my fiancé's. 48 hours before our wedding. The press release called it a visionary leadership transition. Investors called it bold restructuring. My mother called it unfortunate timing. I called it theft. Because the biotech platform they were celebrating, the one promising early cancer detection using adaptive AI, was built on 6 years of my research, my patents, my clinical partnerships, and my sleepless nights. And the board had just voted me out of my own company. No one looked directly at me when the vote concluded. That was the detail that stayed with me. Daniel stared at the polished oak table as if the grain pattern was suddenly fascinating. The chairman folded his glasses carefully. They had rehearsed this. Not emotionally. Wiggly. My shares weren't removed. My authority was. Operational misalignment, they said. Translation. I was no longer useful to their valuation narrative. Daniel, with his clean investor charisma and controlled baritone voice, was easier to sell. A female founder is inspiring. A male CEO is stable. Markets are subtle in their biases. I didn't argue. I asked one question. Who currently controls the licensing rights for derivative training datasets? The room shifted slightly. The legal counsel answered cautiously, the intellectual property resides with Helix Ion Biotech. That was true. But intellectual property and adaptive architecture are not the same thing. The predictive engine required continuous behavioral recalibration using a private oncology dataset compiled over years of clinical collaboration. That dataset was never fully transferred. Not because I didn't trust them. Because I understood dependency. The truth is, I suspected Daniel months earlier. Late-night calls. Sudden urgency to simplify governance. Legal addendums inserted quietly into standard reviews. I noticed everything. I just didn't interrupt. People reveal intent when they believe you feel secure. I felt nothing of the sort. 2 weeks before the board vote, I incorporated a secondary research entity in Cambridge under a separate advisory framework. Entirely legal. Entirely independent. I retained my calibration dataset and my algorithmic bias correction layers. Without those, the platform could launch. But it could not evolve. The wedding cancellation became a trending headline for exactly 12 hours. Mutual decision. Focus on business. The public loves tidy explanations. Daniel sent me a message that night. You're making this harder than it needs to be. That was when I understood something important. He believed control and comfort were the same thing. He thought I would choose emotional closure over structural leverage. He miscalculated. 3 months later, Helix Ion launched without me. The IPO media cycle praised Daniel as the decisive architect who removed internal friction. The stock surged 19% in its first week. Panels described me as brilliant but difficult. Emotional. Visionary but unstable. I watched every interview quietly from my Cambridge office while finalizing validation trials with 3 NHS research hospitals and a US oncology consortium. We didn't rush press releases. We ran data. By Q2, subtle anomalies appeared in Helixion's model. False positives ticked upward. Early markers slipped detection thresholds. Nothing dramatic. Nothing catastrophic. Just statistical drift. Analysts blamed scaling issues. Daniel publicly assured investors that adaptive retraining would optimize performance. What he didn't mention was that retraining required longitudinal behavioral datasets he did not possess. The system was starving. The Global Oncology Summit in Boston became the pivot point. Daniel delivered the keynote, framed by clean graphics and controlled confidence. I attended quietly, seated in the second row. When the Q&A opened, I stood. My voice was calm. Can you clarify your adaptive retraining protocol given the absence of longitudinal behavioral drift correction? The silence wasn't confusion. It was exposure. Daniel attempted a technical answer, But halfway through he realized the architecture he was describing depended on a dataset that legally remained mine. The room sensed it before he finished speaking. 48 hours later, my Cambridge entity released peer-reviewed validation results. 27% improved early detection accuracy. Stable drift correction. Transparent ethics compliance. We had secured partnerships Daniel assumed were loyal to Helixan. Loyalty in biotech follows accuracy, not ego. Analysts began comparing performance charts publicly. Helixion plateaued. Sterling Biotech accelerated. Daniel called me for the first time in months. His voice lacked its investor polish. "You're destabilizing the market." I corrected him gently. "I'm stabilizing patience. Silence carries more weight than shouting." Within 6 weeks, Helixion's board initiated a performance review. Investor confidence dipped. Strategic buyers hesitated. The same chairman who voted me out requested a meeting in London. He spoke carefully, choosing words like stepping across ice. "We may have underestimated the structural dependencies." That was his version of an apology. He offered reacquisition discussions, equity restructuring, shared leadership optics. I declined. Not out of spite. Out of mathematics. I no longer needed Helixion. Helixion needed me. Over the next year, Sterling Biotech expanded steadily, not explosively. Sustainable growth frightens no one and surprises everyone. Meanwhile, Helixion burned capital attempting to replicate my dataset legally. They couldn't. Clinical trust isn't built in quarters. It's built in years. When acquisition talks reopened, valuation had dropped nearly 40% from IPO peak. This time I made the offer. Clean. Direct. Daniel resigned the morning before the acquisition announcement. The press framed it as market correction. Analysts called it consolidation. They never called it what it truly was: inevitability. At the acquisition press conference, cameras flashed exactly like they had the day I was removed. A journalist asked the inevitable question. "Do you feel vindicated?" I considered the word carefully. Vindication implies emotion. I felt precision. "No," I said evenly. "I feel aligned." Because they didn't underestimate my intelligence. They underestimated my patience. They believed removal meant replacement. They never understood that architecture outlives management. They replaced my name on the company website 48 hours before my wedding. 1 year later, my name was on the acquisition contract that absorbed them entirely. And this time, no one avoided eye contact when the vote concluded.